I made it. I'm here.
I'm so happy you're back. I was with Tony. It was awful. He's violent. He seems like a nice guy on camera, but once they go off, you never know what's going to happen.
It sounds like some feedback that you should give to your manager. You should really report that feedback.
Of course, we're kidding. Tony's a great guy. And you know who else is a great guy?
Max Farrell.
Yes. Let's get to chat with Max. Max, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Y'all are too kind. It's a pleasure.
I hear that you get a lot of feedback as well, Max, and that's what we're talking about today, staying on the thread of autonomy, but not autonomous driving, which is what we've been talking about like all week here at FreightWaves. We're talking about autonomy in your feedback loops in your business. Give us a little bit of insight about what you mean by that.
Yeah, so one of the big things that we focus on at Workhound is anonymous feedback, and a lot of people will debate the merits of should our drivers be anonymous when they share or not. You know, a lot of companies out there say, well, if they're not willing to share who they are, then I don't want to listen to it. Well, the reality is that there is a silent majority that's out there that do have issues and do want to be heard. And often they'll feel like their only power out there is to either fight or leave. And then they leave if they don't have an opportunity to voice their concern. And so for the companies out there that are saying, hey, we really want anonymous, or we don't want anonymous feedback, then they're missing the opportunity to get really honest insights about what's going on out there. And so I think it's as more companies are open to the idea of gathering driver feedback and using it as a way to drive their operations forward, figuring out whether they go anonymous or not is a really important question to ask.
And Max, when we look at some of this anonymous feedback, how would you recommend someone react to this? Because are you going to just think that, okay, this is going to be a large problem, I'm going to make a large sweeping change, or are some managers going to be slow to respond because they think it's just a one-off situation?
Yeah, it's a great point. You know, one of the toughest things of anonymous feedback, and it's human nature, it's getting feedback and immediately wanting to know who said this. And so if feedback's not anonymous, that's where the focus immediately goes. And then there's a quick dismissal of, this is this other scenario or situation. And so with anonymous feedback, it forces us to say, okay, we don't know who this is, but let's look at this problem for what it is. Is this really a problem? Are we receiving multiple instances of this sort of feedback? And a big thing for us is embracing open-ended feedback, because often traditional surveys create bias. It's management saying we think we know what the issues are, but if we're in the trucking industry and our average turnover rate is 95%, we've got some blind spots. And so anonymous feedback is a really great way for companies to figure out those blind spots. And to your point, Anthony, it's figuring out how do we take a micro issue that was shared and figure out how to make a macro change across the organization as we drill into seeing, is this a bigger issue than what we thought?
100%. And when you're talking about from an employee comfortability standpoint, I think sometimes anonymous feedback is one of those things that adds an extra layer of security to when you are actually sharing truly kind of honest feedback. But with that, at the same time, if you're maybe a part of a larger organization, if you have a well-rounded HR department, a well-rounded IT department, there's always that threat of what you're sharing isn't actually completely anonymous. Do you see, especially in some of those larger companies, there being any kind of malicious intent with people who are saying, you know what, your stuff is anonymous, but then there's actually a target because there is some type of identifying factor going on with the feedback being collected?
There's always a fear of retaliation. And again, that's one of the big values of anonymous feedback. But really it then comes down to education. And of course, from our approach, we embrace the concept of a third party, really making sure that a driver, if we're in the trucking industry, is able to see, all right, this company is working with a separate group to make this happen. And we're educating multiple different ways to say, hey, this company truly is committed to it. Look at our track record for maintaining anonymity. And then the rest of it comes from word of mouth. Early on, you have different types of drivers that'll share feedback. You've got your early adopters, the day one they've got something to say, and at the other end of the spectrum, you've got your people that are skeptical with their arms crossed, saying, "All right, is the company really going to do something here? And are they really going to respect the anonymity?" And when they do, and people see that the company did respect that, then other people start to jump in and share. And it's a really rewarding sight to see.
And Max, that kind of leads into my next question is around making sure that people actually utilize it, because I can only imagine how many times that I've been, well, I know how many times I've been, it's countless times I've been a part of a company where there's all these benefits, that are really promoted to help the work environment, but no one uses it, and it's just because some people forget about it. Are there any recommendations to really make sure that people are knowing that this is going to be a resource for them, or making sure that it doesn't fall off their mind as they're kind of going off through the day-to-day activities?
Yeah. The easiest thing out there is to gather feedback. There's so many different ways to do it. You can use Google Forms, you can use SurveyMonkey, you can use the suggestion box. It's easy to gather feedback. The really hard thing is understanding that data and doing something with it. And that's a big reason why it's important to find a specialist to help on that. And so once a company has made the commitment to understanding this feedback and doing something about it, you have to close the feedback loop and tell people what you did. And because we're dealing with a multi-generational workforce, you got to communicate multiple different ways. So whether that's sending an update to them in cab device, or printing something out and putting it up in a driver's lounge or at a terminal, that's a really important step. I was even visiting USA Truck in Arkansas last week, and one of the things they do is they actually do a Workhound Wednesday where they share some of the feedback that they've gotten to say, hey, you all brought these issues up. Here's how we're thinking about it. Here's what we're doing about it. Here's some of the miscommunications we want to get on the same page about. But it's an opportunity to say we're serious about acting here, and then that encourages further participation. Because if people see they have an opportunity to be heard, they're going to share.
So with that kind of leads into rounding this all out of how you encourage your folks to, or not even how you encourage. Let's take this from an individual employee standpoint. If you're an individual employee and you're saying, you know what, we need some type of platform, some kind of forum to get our thoughts heard without that fear of retaliation, how do you go about suggesting that to maybe your higher ups or your managers? Because I feel like sometimes maybe if you're like a bottom tier employee saying, hey, we want to have this safe space to advocate for ourselves and to give you our thoughts, sometimes managers can say, oh, you just like want a place to talk crap about us.
Yeah, well, the feedback's going to go somewhere, and that's a big thing to realize. And so I think a great starting point is to say, hey, company, look at the reviews that we're getting on Facebook or Glassdoor or Google reviews, or here's what I'm hearing at the truck stop. Or if there's a influential, usually at companies, there's a pool of influential workers or drivers. And so those folks will say, hey, I've talked to like 25 guys, and this is a thing that's going on. And so then the company's getting filtered in through information from people as opposed to hearing it directly from the individuals themselves. So at a certain point, I think companies will realize, do we want to be able to control the message ourselves, or do we want to have the feedback go elsewhere? And then ultimately, when they realize we want to be able to do a better job controlling the message, then that's the path forward.
And Max, one of the things that kind of pops into my mind as well is, how does a manager go about discerning whether something or someone is really kind of pointing out an issue versus maybe they're just disgruntled and it's not really something that's on the company's end?
Yeah. So first off, it's totally okay if they're disgruntled and throwing one over the fence. If somebody's mad and they're sharing it and sharing feedback with you, be grateful it's shared there than on Google Forms or Google Reviews or something like that. Because again, it's controlled in your ecosystem versus being out in the wild. So first off, take feedback back as a gift instead of an insult. And then from there, it is looking at, are we getting multiple comments about this sort of thing? And then drilling into it and talking to other folks in the office. Is this a bigger issue, or is this really a one-off? So that's some of the ways that we think about discerning that information.
Awesome, Max. Insightful as always, and thanks so much for joining us this morning. We'll be sure to check in with you again soon.
Hey, thanks so much. Appreciate